She said it felt like something was trying to pick the car up. And as she looked back, she saw something there, something dark. And when the door ripped off the hinges, she just spat up. And of course...
Welcome back, everybody, to your favorite travel channel, The Adventure Guide. And today I will be covering one of the most requested stories by the viewers, The Werewolf of London, Ohio. This story was made popular by Paranormal Witness in their most famous episode called The Cabin. In this episode, we'll be interviewing Keith Williams, who was the main witness of most of these encounters. First, we'll compare and contrast what Paranormal Witness led us to believe with what actually happened. And believe it or not, some of the most incredible, mind-blowing facts were left out, and I have no idea why. Then, since this is a travel channel, I will be revealing the locations. The great news is there's a trail that goes by a number of these areas, and there's still activity to this day. Also, if you've had a personal encounter or you have a story you'd like me to cover, please visit my Reddit page and shoot me a message. I'll leave a link to my Reddit page in the description below. And now, let's get into this adventure. This is the Paranormal Witness version. Keith and Diane Williams had moved just outside the small town of London, a suburb of Columbus. Together they had a 4-year-old daughter, Raven, and among the beautiful farms that swept the landscape in the area, Diane had located a home that was backed up against the forest. Keith was a welder, and to improve their lives, he began to take night classes. The safety of Diane and Raven wasn't much of a concern to him because they lived in a super safe area. However, things spun from peace and tranquility into a creepy and bizarre hell for the family. One night that Keith was away at school, Diane heard a little, quote, scampering noise outside. She looked around outside the window, but she couldn't catch a glimpse of the critter making the noise. She assumed it was a deer or a dog. She goes back to doing other things, and when she looks over at the window, she sees a set of eyes out there. Again, it still didn't bother her because she assumed it was a dog or a deer. She saw the set of eyes again, but this time she noticed something. These eyes were at eye level, and by the different places she'd heard this thing scampering around at outside the house, she knew whoever that was watching her. She went into a panic and began to close all the curtains. Not long after, Keith showed up and found Diane in a frazzled state of terror. She had told Keith what had happened, and so he grabbed a flashlight, he went outside, and he looked around. However, there were no signs of tracks or anything about. The thing of it is that Keith had grown up as a hunter and knew how to track animals and how to look for signs. There were no signs or tracks anywhere about. He went in to let Diane know that nothing had been there, but she was certain something had been. It became a point of contention as Keith told her it was either her reflection or nerves causing her brain to play tricks on her. Well, it appeared that Keith was right. It had been a month and it had not returned. Diane went back to her normal life and boom, there they were in the window again. This time they were up super close. She stares at them as she backs up, and this is no reflection. She backs slowly into the front room out of sight of the eyes. It simply walked around to the front room window. Diane, desperately trying to get the upper hand of who can see who, turns off all the lights in the house. This way, she could see out, but it could not see in. She looks out the windows one by one, and it appears it had left. But there it appeared in the front room window. It looked real, not like a ghost or a spirit, but as a material thing. It was a humanoid shape. Diane was certain it was a man trying to break into the house, so she called 911, and they dispatched officers right away. As soon as Diane hangs up, she hears him walk towards the dining room at the back of the house. Eventually, law enforcement arrived. Officers let Diane know that they were there, and they began to search the premise. While they were out back searching, Keith drives up to red and blue lights flashing in his yard. Officers come out and tell them that there were no signs of anyone. Unfortunately, officers told Keith they thought his wife was just nervous and overreacting from being out in the countryside alone at night. This was already Keith's assumption. Keith was upset and embarrassed. He once again tried to ease Diane's fears, but this time, she knew for sure something was out there. Shortly after Thanksgiving of 1981, a fresh snow had fallen. Keith woke up earlier than his wife and daughter and decided to run to town real quick to get donuts for the family. He walked out to his car, started it up, and eventually turned on the headlights. At that point, he saw something in the rearview mirror. He got out of the car, grabbed the flashlight, and he shined it around, but he didn't see anyone. But in the snow, there were tracks, and they didn't go into the woods, and they didn't go away. They went up on the roof. Keith is just standing there in horror, looking up at the tracks on his roof. He ran inside and grabbed his rifle, then called his friend Dennis to get there immediately. Dennis made haste, and he was greeted by Keith with his .30-30. He looked at Keith with his gun and said, "You can't fire that around here." But Keith told him they may have no choice, and he showed him the tracks. When Dennis looked at him, he asked, "What the hell are those?" Keith and Dennis could tell that the thing was no longer on the roof, but it also didn't come down either. Well, that's what they thought until they saw impact marks, where it had leapt off the house at an impossible 20 feet away. A human being would not be able to withstand that type of an impact. The height and distance and momentum needed would easily equate a 35 to a 40-foot fall. This would break a lot of bones in the body and most likely destroy the lungs and heart. If it was a human, they would have found him laying there incapacitated. Not only did this thing make an inhuman supernatural leap, but it walked away into the woods with no blood trail. Nevertheless, it left a clear set of tracks, and both Keith and Dennis were experienced trackers. But with tracks in the snow, a 5-year-old could do this. The tracks were about 14 inches long with clawed marks at the tips of the toes. This 100% is not a human. It was also fully bipedal and not walking on all fours. Following this thing into the woods was way too dangerous to do, but Keith was putting an end to this thing once and for all. Dennis, being a good friend, followed Keith into the woods. It took a long time following the tracks because they could be ambushed at any moment. Slowly they made their way into the forest and traveled 2 miles away. Then they came to the forest edge. A little ways from the tree line was a tiny cabin about 18 foot long. The tracks continued on to the back porch of this cabin. At this point, reality fully kicks in, and Keith said, quote, "Animals don't open and shut doors on their own." Dennis was irate and began pounding on the cabin walls and telling the thing to come out. Keith looks down at his hands and he sees he's holding a gun on someone else's property. He tells Dennis they have to get out of there. So they walk out to the road and head over to a phone. As they were down closer to town, Keith called his dad, who came and picked him and Dennis up. Keith explained everything to his dad that had happened, and his dad knew exactly who the cabin belonged to. Keith's dad told the boys that the man who lived in that cabin also worked at the tire shop. The guy had lived there for decades, but no one really knew much about him. The next week, Dennis showed up at Keith's house with a tire that needed to be plugged. So they took it down to the tire shop to get a look at the cabin owner. The manager took the tire, rolled it into a dim shop. Then the manager shouted the name, "George," and told him to fix the tire. A tall, lanky fellow that seemed like he was about 6'5" stepped out of the dark part of the shop, picked up the tire, and looked straight at Keith and Dennis with a supernatural gaze. George not only gave them a go-to-hell look, but it put them in some sort of a trance for a moment. Keith said his eyes were a vivid gold. George knew that it was them that had tracked him onto his property, and they knew George was the stalker. George took the tire and stepped back into the dark area of the shop to work on it, then rolled it back out repaired. Keith and Dennis realized that there were symbols written on it. Neither of them knew what they meant. George never bothered Keith or his family again. Dennis, however, seemed the most eager to get answers. He called Keith one day and said he needed to go on a drive, but didn't tell Keith why. Once Keith saw where they were headed, he told Dennis to turn around, for he knew they were headed to George's cabin. But Dennis looked over at Keith and said, "He's dead." Keith needed assurance, and Dennis said his father had heard over the radio scanner that George was dead. Now the thing of it is, the creepiest part of the story happens after George's death. So Dennis pulls up to George's cabin, and there's a deputy parked in the driveway. The deputy seems a little disturbed. He took Keith and Dennis over to the cabin. They went inside, and there was no food, no clothing, no furniture to speak of. Nothing. Then the deputy walked over to a door and said, "Look at this." He opened it up, and the smell of a wet dog rolled out of the room when it opened. It was kept completely dark. The walls were covered in iron plates jointed together by strips of steel that were riveted together. None of that is what the deputy really wanted them to see. What he wanted to point out to them was 2 10-foot-long strands of chain, and at the end was a disturbing sight: shackles. Then the deputy pointed out that there were scratches all over the walls. Some were rusted, indicating that they were made long ago, and others were fresh. The episode ended stating that all that was left behind was a jar of old silver dollars, and that George was buried in London, Ohio, in an unmarked grave. So that's how Paranormal Witness decided to present this story. Now, let's listen to Keith about what actually happened.
This goes back to 1982. We had just moved in a house on the edge of town, and I was busy with not only working a full-time job, but also going to a trade school after work to qualify to get a travel card, which was, in union terms, that means I could go to other sites and work when there was work. And I wasn't pinned to any one single location, but it took some time to achieve that. And then meanwhile, about every day or so, my wife would say, "Look, there's somebody looking in the windows here." And I thought, well, I'll have a look. And I didn't see anything and seen any evidence that anyone was there. And I just chalked it up as to new house jitters. We liked the place we were living before. We were renters at the time. But we had to move from that place to this place, which was nicer, but it was just, for her, it was unsettling for whatever reason. Behind the house was a old railroad track. And on the other side of the railroad tracks was woods, which I was familiar with because I hunted the area as a kid. And this went on for a while. And she'd even called the police to have a look, and they didn't see anything. So one morning I'd gotten up early. It was a Saturday morning. I decided to go for donuts because there was a new donut shop in town. So I went up at the carport door and got in the car. As I started the car to let it warm up, I saw something move in the rearview mirror. So I looked in the rearview mirror. And at first I didn't see anything. And then the image, as so often happens, you look at something and you can't pull it out of the background. But there it was. There's 2 huge eyes looking right at me. I thought, well, what is that? I just sat there for a moment. And then it dropped its head down. Then I got a full view of the image of its head. So I didn't want to take a chance on just trying to get back in the house because I didn't know what this was. It was seemingly leaning down, looking into the garage as though it was bending over. So that would have put its height at over 7 feet because the garage door is 7 feet tall, and it was leaning down, looking under into the garage area. So just out of a reaction to something to do, I threw it in reverse and shot backwards out of the garage into the driveway, and I slammed on the brakes and looked, and there wasn't anything there. I thought, what just happened? But then I noticed that there were, a few seconds later, I guess it would be, there were footprints in the new snow that had happened overnight. It wasn't deep snow, but as you know, typical of Ohio, it'll snow overnight or in the daytime, and it's gone in a few hours. It was that type of snow. And I thought, how did it go over the roof? So I slammed it back in gear. There's no way it's going to lead, my family in the house with something like this going on. So I pulled up there and jumped out of the car, ran back in the house. I got my gun. Shuffling around woke my wife up. She said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" I said, I thought I saw something out there. She said, "I told you, there's something out there." I said, "Well, just let me look, okay?" So since she was up, I didn't want to go outside at night. So I waited for daylight. This was like before daylight, about 6:30 in the morning. Typically in Ohio, it doesn't get daylight to after 7. This would have been November. It was before the holidays, early December, right in there. And once the daylight came, then I was able to make out track leading out of the backyard towards those old railroad tracks. At that point, I was obligated to do something. So I called my friend, who was an old hunting buddy, told him what happened. He said, "I got to see this." So he came down, and he's got his gun, and I grabbed up mine, and we start tracking this. We track it into the wooded area, and the brush is thick, so we're weaving back and forth in that. Find a track here or there, because in thicket there, it's hard to follow a track because there's just a piece of it here or there or the other place. Mostly we were looking at snow that was not apparent on the limbs. So you could almost pick out a path of travel based on there was no snow on the limb and the small bushes and trees. So we followed that. And we came out to the other side, and that's where we were going through the brush. He was looking at me, and I was looking at him. Like any second, we were expecting something to explode right in front of us, because just based on what I saw. Which, by the way, I'll just make a brief description of it. To me, it looked like a giant image of the old Egyptian god. I think it's Horus. It looked similar to a Doberman Pinscher in a way. So as we traveled on, we came out into a clearing, and we saw the tracks headed right for the back door of this old check station. There was a tile mill there in the early part of the 20th century when tiling was all clay, and they made clay tiling. Of course, it was been shut down since World War II. They'd went out of business during the war, and there were just remnants of that laying there. And somebody had converted that little check station into a cabin. As we walked around it, there was no exit. I mean, whatever went in there is still in there. My friend's going nuts. He's beating on the... And for whatever reason, for me, it was more about, hey, let's not get in trouble here. They were neighbors, but they were quite a ways down the road there, probably about, 50 yards or more to the first house. There was little houses down through there on the roadway, and it dead ended into that old tile mill area there. And so I finally talked him out down the road, and we walked past those houses, and I didn't see anybody to talk to ask who lived there. So we walked out to the road and walked up to a phone booth. It was near a pizza shop by the railroad tracks. The area where this was right in between two sets of railroad tracks. One was like a minor spur of tracks that went out into the farmlands, and the other was the main, what they used to call the four ways. There was two sets of tracks. Big four is what they called them. And so I called my dad, and he come picked us up. He said, what are you guys doing out here? What, you're hunting? I said, no. And I told him what happened. He said, there is an old guy that lives back there. He said, nobody knows who he is, but everybody's seen him. And that was the interesting part of the whole thing, that this guy that lived there, nobody seemed to know him, even though they'd seen him 100 times walking up and down the railroad tracks. He never seemed to use the roadways. He always walked along the tracks. And after that happened, I became more and more intrigued into trying to find this guy, because nobody knew where he was. And everyone said he did live in that old house. They didn't know if he was still there, but obviously someone was. And my old friend found out that he was working part-time in an old tire shop. So we decided to go and take a look at him. So he took a tire that was flat and needed fixed anyway, so we took it down and had the tire fixed, and he did the tire repair there at that little tire shop. So we watched him from outside. Of course, we weren't allowed in the shop, and we could tell he was looking at us. He was pretty tall, probably well over 6 feet, 6'3", 4, 5 maybe. Thin, had a thin face. Came to a point in the front. He fixed the tire, and he just rolled it out there and never said anything. So we did all we could do, as far as looking at him. I didn't approach him because I just didn't want to create a situation. I thought, well, at least I know where the guy is. But he never showed up there again. We went back and talked to the guy that ran the tire shop. He said, nah, he just was helping out a while. We ain't seen him since. As we were looking at the tire, my friend's, I guess would be sister-in-law, noticed, well, what's these marks on here? And we were looking at them, and I had no idea. She copied them down, and she was attending college at the time. She went to see a professor who happened to know about things like that. He told her that it looked like some kind of rune or symbolistic writings. He said, there's no way to tell what it meant, because most of that kind of stuff was regional anyway. And so we thought, well, he's trying to communicate something. It was a little bit frustrating, a little bit eerie, that sort of type of thing. And that is literally the last time I saw the guy at all. And going around the whole area where he seemed to be habitating, I would find people who'd seen him. Oh, yeah, I seen him. I think his name is George, but I never could even confirm that for sure, because the guy at the tire shop paid him cash. one day, my hunting buddy, he said, there's something going on down there. He said, I think your boy might have did something. So we went down there, and lo and behold, they found someone who was deceased near the railroad tracks. And even then, at that point, we didn't find out what had happened to him. But I guess it was him, the person that everyone saw. That was the last of him that I know of. But they went to see if he was living in that cabin, and all they ever found in there was a little table and a chair, and there was a sink in there. And in the back room, it must have been an old cash hold or something, because the room was steel plated, and there were chains that were on the wall, and the walls were all scratched up. I mean, pretty good. And it wasn't caused by the chains being moved around. Being someone who knew about metal and metal work, there's no way those chains made those marks. Something else did. What? I don't know. But the officer who was on the scene said that, look, guys, he said, I wonder what was tied up here. And he just said, you smell that? And there was this odor in the air. It was like a musky, wet dog smell. And that's all of that led up to producers of the show referred to as werewolf. I never said werewolf at any given time, and I never even thought that. But that officer did mention that, and I shook my head. I thought, well, that can't be. It always made me wonder what in the world, what could this guy have been? Because he simply didn't have any origins. But a former officer I talked to, he said a lot of people like that. He said they were like from Europe. After World War II, they would just show up, and some of them had Nazi connections, so they stayed to themselves, and they never revealed too much about themselves. He said that could have been the case, but he said, who really knows? So it was just a mystery that stayed a mystery. There was never anything that I could find out about the guy. Even the people that spoke to him briefly, he only said a few words to them. Even the tire shop guy said, he's a quiet guy. We've offered him food and everything else, and he never took anything. He just wanted a few bucks, and then he was gone. I mean, what I saw in that brief moment and the tracks we followed, the tracks were probably about 14 inches long, pretty long, and they had a strange heel pattern where the heel was pretty narrow. I talked to a native guy once, long after that, and he said it was probably, he gave him some kind of a name. I can't even remember what it is, a funny name, but he said, when you see them, he said, that means something that's drawn them there. He said, the fact they come to your house, it may not have anything to do with you, but he said, someone that lived there, been around there, that they wanted to make contact with for whatever reason. And he said he saw a pack of them once when he was younger on a lake in Wisconsin. He saw them cross a lake. He just said that whatever you do, he said, don't draw their ire or make them mad. He said, if you do that, he said, then you're going to have real problems. He said people that disappeared and everything else from them. And he pretty much said they were like a dogman type of thing. So in all these years, I still don't know what to think other than there was something there. It left tracks. It was coming to my house. I don't know why. And we had moved not too long after that. We stayed until early summer, and then we moved out of there. But in that whole area, there were other people who said they saw things. One guy's back porch decking was ripped away from his house. Now, what could do that? I talked to him at the local store, and he said, there's something around there. He said he'd lived there well over 20 years, and he said, there's something around there. He said, but we don't know what it is. He said, sometimes we see a track here or there. He said, what are you going to do with that? Who are you going to tell? And I know the video made it really interesting and all that. And it was accurate almost to amazement. My amazement, it was just really accurate. Except a couple little things that really didn't matter anyway. And it was really well done, I thought. And it happened just that way.
So do you mind if I ask you some questions?
No, go ahead.
So when you first moved into the home, did you feel any weird or like spooky sensations or like the feeling of being watched?
One time, I had forgotten about that, but I was in the back, and I had talked with the neighbor a couple of days before that, and he said something about keep an eye on the back. He said somebody's coming out of them woods back there messing with stuff. And there was a little utility shed in the back of this house. It was one of those little cheap metal type of buildings. I think they're 5x6 or something like that. I just went back there and looked to see what was in there. And I saw this weird handprint on the back of it, kind of close to the top. Because I was making sure there wasn't any bees nest or anything in there, because we had a little baby daughter at the time. She was only like 4 years old, and I didn't want her to get stung. And there was just grass that had blown up into there. It wasn't a bee's nest. And I did start feeling like there was somebody looking at me. I mean, as humans, we have that sixth sense almost that we can tell when something's looking at us. So something was definitely looking at me from the back area near the railroad tracks. I couldn't see it, but I knew something was there, even at that point.
Did you ever hear any screams or howls at night?
I don't remember any specifically there being any thing like that.
Did you ever find like any animal remains or like strange objects or symbols, anything like in the trees or anything around your home?
I know, to give you a description, the houses were up near the main route. That was a state route that ran through London there, 665. It was Center Street, just where I was, and maybe a quarter of a mile past, and that's where the city limits was. And behind there, it was a good, 50, 60 yards back to those railroad tracks. And then on the other side of the railroad tracks, that's where the woods began. And of course, there's a heavy tree line on our side of the tracks as well. So if something like that were to happen, you would just assume a train had hit something. But no, I didn't see anything in my yard that would indicate remains of anything.
Paranormal Witness episode was pretty vague about what Diane had saw and witnessed. Did she ever describe to you in detail what she saw in the window?
Yeah, she said there was just this big head with red eyes, which to me made sense because at any given angle through a window, eyes can turn different colors like a red. She said she just saw red eyes through the window and a big head. She said when she screamed and backed up, it took off. She said she heard it out there. I said, oh, okay. But at that point, it was just after we moved into the place, like it in the fall, and it was dry, wasn't any rain, so there was no tracks. I believed her, but I thought the guy down the road had a couple of shepherd dogs, and I thought, well, maybe one of them got loose and jumped up on the side of the house. And I looked for paw prints or anything along there, and I didn't see anything. But I thought, well, you try to rationalize and figure out what something is, but if there's no evidence apparent, what do you do?
Did she ever see like a form at all, or just the eyes?
Yeah, she said from like the shoulders and the head, and she said it had that big like triangle head, she said, which makes sense because that was just what I saw as well. Same thing. Something with a big triangular shaped head like a dog, and it was big. I mean, whatever that was, it was huge in size. I mean, it wasn't any kind of a natural animal, let's put it that way. It wasn't a species that's common.
Now, did he ever try to open the windows or doors, or was he just peering through the window?
Well, she said one time it hit the back of the house pretty good. And she said she had to put her hand over her eyes and look out the back window because right over the sink was like a light there to see outside. She said she saw it going down the back of the yard, she said, and it was huge. To gauge the size of it, we had a little swimming pool out there, and she said it was bigger than that pool. Of course, I thought she was exaggerating. I thought, well, I didn't argue with her, but whatever it was, I would guesstimate it would, like I said, it had to be over 7 feet tall. And a weight guesstimate, it had to be 350 pounds at least, something that size. I'm just guessing, pulling numbers out of the air, but I know one thing, anything that could go from a standstill, leap in the air, go over a roof, and land in the middle of the backyard is big.
Now, did Diane ever talk about it making any growling sounds or talk at all or anything, or was he just silent?
She said our little girl told her that she would hear. She said she raised her little hand in the air and made it like a talking sound. She said, it goes like this, Mommy. And she said, there's something out there. You need to do something. I said, what am I going to do? But she did say our daughter heard it, something out there making a growling noise. Now, this is a little kid, and, what did she hear? Of course, she doesn't remember it now. I don't think she really even remembered living there at 4 years old. I mean, I don't remember when I was 4. So.
Right. Did she ever claim to have seen anything out in the yard?
No, her brother, though, told me that he said that there was something running along the railroad tracks back there. Whatever it was pretty big. I said, well, was it a pony horse? He said, nah. He said, whatever it was, as he said in his Appalachian voice, it was a flying low, man, he said. And he said it was just some kind of black thing that ran down those tracks and disappeared. There was incidents before, and I guess after we moved out of there, that something was around there. But I don't know. Old George, the old weird guy, he got put in that because he was in the area. I don't know if it was him or he had anything to do with it.
When law enforcement showed up the time that Diane had called them,
yeah.
Did they make a connection with what she was witnessing with other calls they'd received in the area?
I didn't get to talk to him. I don't know that. At that time, I remember some of the characters that were on the force. These weren't like professional lawmen or anything. These are just local guys that got a job at the cop shop, as we called it. I don't think they would have, put two and two together. They were just arrest a rowdy guy that had too much to drink or something like that is about all they did. I wouldn't say that they had the professional prowess to put stuff like that together. I never heard that they did anyway.
Did you have any theory why George was targeting your house?
No, that's the thing. I would have no idea why he would do that. I mean, why just that place? I mean, there was another place just like it right next door, but no one was living there at the time. So I did go over there and walk around that place. And they did have a ripped screen in the back of it, but who knows how that happened.
Going back to what you saw that morning, so you said it looked kind of like Anubis, the jackal god of Egypt. Was it black?
Yes.
Okay.
Shiny black.
Short fur?
Yep, short fur. It had a short brushy tail. It was there like 1 second and gone the next. And I couldn't tell where it went because the snow cloud from my vehicle backing up quickly like that burst into the air, and then when it came back down, it was gone. And then a few seconds later, I seen the tracks going over the roof, and it occurred to me, oh my God, it went over top of the roof. Because I flushed it from the area where it was standing there looking into the garage at me. This form and full. It was thin, probably 7 feet or even a little taller. It was almost something like that can't be. I saw it. It was there, and it left tracks. I got to be honest. If it wasn't for the fact that I left those tracks to follow, I wouldn't even believe I saw anything because it's so fantastical. I'm a common sense type of guy, and I don't make things up. I don't see things everywhere. So there was something there. The only question is, what was it? And I have no clue.
Do you recall? Did you get a good look at its snout?
Yeah, it resembled, like I said, the giant Anubis. It had a long, thin snout and the pointed ears. The ears, I would say, although they were pinned back a little bit, I'd say they had to be 8 to 10 inches long. And the head had a big triangular shaped head. That in itself would have probably been, 20 inches or more from snout to the back of its head.
That is massive.
Oh, it was. It was massive. It wasn't a dog. I would swear on that. That was no dog.
Did you see the limbs, its arms, and did they terminate with hands, or did you see that?
I really couldn't tell, to be honest. I mean, I'm not going to start making things up at this point. I really couldn't tell if it had hands or what was going on because it was just like a couple of split seconds there and gone,
Right.
It was canine. I know that. It had eyes, I would guesstimate, the size of $50. Black eyes, just chilling. I mean, that's what froze me, those eyes. Because I saw it in the mirror, and I just saw the eyes because of the reflection on its eyes. Those round black eyes. There wasn't even any whites in it. And then when it moved a little bit, I made out the shape of its head, and I thought, what is that? At that point, I was more transfixed and amazed than I was afraid or concerned. But that changed really quick when I saw the outline of its head, and that's when I threw it in reverse and got out of the garage because I didn't want to be pinned in there. It was just very, very big, very, very fast, agile. I mean, it's something you go over your roof and land out in the middle I would guesstimate it from the roof, the back of my house, to where it landed out there. And it slid when it hit the ground about 6 feet or so before it started taking off again. It was probably 30 feet out in the middle of my backyard is where it landed. So it was moving on when it come down the other side of the back of the house.
Did you hear it land?
No, I was out in the car in the driveway.
Gotcha.
The engine was running. I had one of these old Pontiacs, a little bit of a rumble muffler on it because may have need replaced. But no, I didn't hear it land. I didn't hear any of that.
Paranormal Witness jumped from you seeing something to Dennis showing up. Did anything else happen in between that time, or? Yeah,
this was before daylight, okay? I mean, even though a morning hue, I could have seen that, but there's no way I'm going to chase something that big in the dark. So I had to wait for daylight anyway, and I had to listen to the wife. I told you there's something out there. I said, I believe you. I seen it. Okay. You know, I had to get her calmed down, and as soon as it got daylight, I called my friend, and he was out, and he said, I'll be there, man. He said, I got to see this. He showed up with his gun, and he seen the tracks on the roof. He said, what did that? He said, it went over the roof, right? I said, yeah. And we went out in the backyard, and we looked, and we seen where it hit the ground. And we were both experienced hunters and trappers. And we knew that when it hit the ground, its feet went up from under it, and it slid for about 10 feet. And then the tracks began. You know, people say, oh, it was probably a Bigfoot. No, this was no Bigfoot. The tracks were long, but the heel was very narrow. It was almost like a human print, but in the front, it was a little bit different. But in the back, the heel was narrow. It was about 14 inches or so. And we started tracking it through the woods. And again, Paranormal Witness did a great job of making it interesting going through the woods. And that's just about how it was with us. Because at any moment, we expected the brush to explode and something there to confront us. But we never caught up with it.
Now, were the tracks clawed?
Clawed, you said?
Yeah,
there was something in the front. Some kind of nail. I don't know what it was definitely not a dog paw, okay? It was more like a human's, but it did have some kind of a claw toe marks there. But it's hard to make out in the snow, especially after any time had dissipated, they start to change, and morph.
Did it appear he leapt up onto the roof, or did he climb up there, like with a tree or something?
There's another good question, because there was a drain spout there, and it wasn't torn down or anything. But all you could really tell was tracks going over the roof and down the backside, and then probably 30 feet or more in the backyard is where it landed. But, there's just no way to tell whether it climbed or jumped or what it did.
When you guys entered the woods and you were tracking him, could you hear him in the woods at all, or did he just have such a far head start?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, we heard this or that, but by that time, whatever it was already through that woods and into the clearing and over to the other set of railroad tracks. We went over there and looked, and we went probably 20 yards up and down the other side of that cabin, looking for tracks that may have exited going down, but there wasn't anything over there. So we were pretty convinced that whatever it was still there. And it wasn't any tracks, like I said, over in front of the cabin. Whatever it was still in that cabin, I firmly believe.
Now, did this cabin have electric, plumbing, or anything like that, or was it?
I have to assume it did. I don't remember seeing any wires in the air going to it. I didn't look for that. I had a sink in there, so it had to have water. That's all I remember seeing. Just a little sink stand there and a little table. Found out that it was an old check station. Because back at that time, they were still using horse and wagons when that place was in operation. And the wagons would stop there and check in, and then they would go back and load their wagons with the clay tiling, and then they would pull them out to go take them to wherever, and they would check out and pay. So that might have been a cash room at one time. I'm not even sure. I'm guessing that, trying to make some kind of sense out of it.
Now, did when you were at the tire shop, did they call his name out as George, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
But like when we talked to the guy that ran the tire shop, he said, hell, I don't even know if that's his name or not. He said, we just pay him to help us out on the weekends sometimes. He said, he'll come in, work a half a day or so, clean up any work we got, and then he's gone again. He said, we may never see him again. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. They never saw him again after that. I don't know that anybody knew his last name. I never heard that.
So in Paranormal Witness, it showed a newspaper up close for a second or two, and it had the headline, "Porch Torn from Local Man's House." And I was going to ask you if that had any meaning, but you did tell me about that.
Yeah, that was a guy by the name of Shoemaker. I can't remember his first name, but his family ran a market down towards the street, the side street that went back in there. And something tore his back deck off. And he said, you tell me what can do that. He said he wasn't even home when it happened. He was gone somewhere. And he said he happened to look out there and saw that some of his decking was out in the yard. He said it just looked like it walked up and started tearing it apart and pitching it over its shoulder into the backyard. He said it was the damnedest thing he ever saw. He said it was treated lumber. He said, what could just rip that up like that? I said, I don't know. Of course, the police had no idea either. So whatever it was big and it was powerful.
Now, did your dad tell you anything more about George that wasn't talked about in Paranormal Witness?
No, nobody knew anything about him. I mean, he was just there. I mean, he's just an old guy. Apparently, there was no incentive for anybody to investigate who he was or anything. I mean, he'd never been accused of anything, or the cops had never had an interaction with him. The only people saw him, just saw him in transit, walking back and forth.
Right.
The only person I ever found that actually conversed with the guy was the old guy at the tire shop. And he said he didn't really know where he was from. He said he'd been around there as long as I'd been. He laughed and he chuckled. I said, a long time, huh? I said, yeah. He said, I seen him around before around there where he lives, I guess. He said, I'd seen him, but he said, I don't know who he really is. Nobody knew who he was. That was what I ran into. Nobody knew him. It's not like he had you would assume, and that's what you're doing. You're assuming things. You would assume that, hey, the guy, he's got friends or associates, or he's had to have contact with somebody, but he didn't. No one I could find even knew anything about him. And the people that lived on the very road where he allegedly lived in that cabin, some on the other side didn't even know he was down there. And they said, no, we don't know nothing about some guy down there. I said, okay. And the lady in the last house before you got to there, she'd seen him wandering around there. She said, he gives me the creeps. I said, well, you know? And she said, no, I don't know. And she said, he's there 1 minute and he's gone the next.
Did the owner of the tire shop mention if he had an accent?
No, he said he didn't say much of anything. He said, just, what did he sound like? He said, he just mumbles a little bit, and that's all. He said, I never had to tell him to do it. He said he knew what he was doing. That's all I cared. And he got me caught up on work. And when I said, that's all I got, all the work I got today, I'd hand him a few bucks and he'd nod his head and go his own way. He said he'd really only work for that guy like a handful of times, just to take care of extra work for him. The guy had like a tire shop on the other side of the building where he worked out of was like a junk shop. He had car parts and stuff in there. The little tire bay was just a sideline of his business.
About how old was George?
Oh, he was, he had to be, that would have been in 82. He would have been up at over 70.
Oh, wow.
Well over 70, I'd say. But he was in amazing shape. He wasn't somebody who looked like he was overeating anything. In fact, it occurred to me one day on the way home from work, I said, I'm going to go around to the stores in the area, see if he'd ever been in there and, anything like that. And nobody ever remember seeing him in the store anywhere. Now, what was he eating? We don't know that even, nor he got food.
When you saw George in the tire shop, for a split second there, you said there was something mesmerizing about his eyes?
Yeah, he had pretty strange. They were like silver, like at first was I told my buddy, he said he just got blue eyes. He said people get old like that. He said their eyes change colors. Then when he bust that tire. He said, he's got silver eyes. Look at that. I said, I told you. There's something with his eyes. He had like a silver glare to his eyes. Had pretty big eyes, too. I mean, some people do. I mean, it wasn't unheard of, somebody having eyes that big. I mean, he had pretty big eyes, and they were like a silver. Now, was it due to age or whatever? I don't know. But that was another odd aspect to it. I admit, I mean, I wasn't too hepped up on running in there and questioning the guy. That's what somebody from that Paranormal Witness crew said. When you go in there after the guy? He was at your house, right? I said, I don't know that. I don't know that was him. I said, whatever that wasn't a person. And that's when they made up the werewolf story. So, I don't know. There's no way somebody transforms into something else in my mind. I refuse to believe that, so I don't know.
Now, on Paranormal Witness, they described his eyes as being gold.
They said it could have been gold, it could have been this. You were pitching things to me. I said, yeah, something like that. But it was actually more of a silver. Giant silver eyes.
Now, did Paranormal Witness try to make you change things at all, or were they?
They were trying to make a story, okay, let's be honest. But they didn't say anything that was untrue that I didn't tell them, other than they added the werewolf narrative that I didn't make. But, boy, the story just fits that to a T, doesn't it? I mean, I didn't get too upset about that, but I never at any time said werewolf. I mean, that would be the first thing that come to your mind. A cabin with a metal room with chains, scratches on the walls, and some old weird guy that nobody knows anything about creeping around. I mean, what's that? That's Lon Chaney, right?
Yeah.
It was all there. I couldn't put anything together because there was no evidence. I couldn't find anybody that knew him, that knew anything about him. If I could just find a link somewhere that maybe I could have just maybe cleared him altogether, the guy may not have anything to do with it. And I don't know how he did. That certainly wasn't him that I saw looking in my garage. I know that. But it was just an odd meeting there of an old guy and then something like that happening. It was strange and unknown. I mean, it was just all too convenient. Something's there. I don't know what it is.
Going back to the markings on the tire, do you remember what they look like? Was it like symbols, or did it appear to be like an alphabet?
No, it was definitely symbols. Whoever it was that my buddy's sister-in-law talked to said it resembled runes, but he said it could be, but he said a lot of that stuff was regional from this group to that. And sometimes they would have common symbols from one to the other, and other times they made up their own. He said there's no telling what that is, really. I mean, they didn't have any format basis to say, okay, here it is. This came from this region here or that.
Right.
But that's what it looked like. It looked like some kind of Nordic runes.
Now, did they say what George had died of?
No, I didn't focus on that because we couldn't get near it. They had a place cordoned off. But I just assumed he sat down and died. I never heard that he got hit by a train. If he did, I would find that hard to believe because the guy lived there apparently for many, many years and never had any trouble negotiating his tracks. So anything can happen, but I wouldn't think that would be it. He probably just sit down there and dissipated.
Do you remember the month and year he died?
Yeah, I tried to find it. When I went back to gather what I could find for the episode, they said, well, you're closer. Can you? I said, yeah, I was always curious anyway. And there's nothing in the death records from that era of somebody like that. And I talked to the chief of police. He said, there was something that happened. He said, but I can't remember. He said. So, and also, the producers talked to the chief of police of that era. And nobody can seem to remember what actually did happen. But there was no coroner records of it. But they had something they called a potter's field. It's what it was. Going out of town the other way, where they buried transients or somebody didn't have any family or something like that. They said, that's probably where he's at. I mean, they don't keep records for that. You think they would, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
If it's not a matter of a crime, he said, there's not going to be any records of it. He said it was just an incident. They said, probably nobody even wrote anything down at all. The coroner's office didn't have any records of something like that, which they should have, you would think, no matter if somebody's a victim of crime or not. Again, another dead end. I mean, that just kept happening over and over and over again.
Now, in the cabin, the door that went to that room with the chains, do you remember what that door looked like?
It was made just like the rest of it. Well, it wasn't welded. It had the rivets. In the old days, before welding, they would use rivets. They would heat up the rivets and drive them through and beat them down and all that. The part of the door was wooden, but the outline and across the metal was steel plate. And I just assumed that it was a cash room where people would pay for their purchase. It was tiling, and then they would put the money in there, I guess. Again, I don't know for sure. But something was in there, I knew that.
Now, during this time period, do you recall if there was any reports of missing people in the London area?
Yeah, there was always somebody missing, but normally runaway kids or whatever.
Could you describe the chains and shackle a little better?
Yeah, there was just what it looked like. There was two links of chain. Now, this wasn't just small chain. These were log chains. And they were on a round clevis mount. And again, it was attached to the wall by rivets. And probably about 8-10 foot long each, two sections of chain.
Now, were there shackles on them?
No, just chain hanging there. It was down on the floor, actually. And that's what we started looking for, on the floor. I said, well, did they have some of the chain in here or what? The cop said, I don't know. We said, look at this. I don't know what's going on here. But we didn't see any evidence of, like somebody had been kept there. But we don't know why there would be scratches on the ceiling and on the walls up, because it was about an 8-foot ceiling, okay? Now, why would there be scratches on the ceiling and high on the walls like that? That's the thing I don't get.
Were the scratches thin like a claw, or were they kind of thick like fingernails?
Thinking back, my friend pointed and said, look at that. It looks like 4 claw marks down through here. And that's what it did look like, 4 claw marks. But the rest seemed to be more or less random, maybe not even the same time and era. Yeah, that's another thing. What do you do with that? I mean, it was just there, and there's no way to find out how it happened. Who did it? When? Nothing.
Now, were those scratch marks, were they just like a single scratch that went down, or was it like where something had scratched over and over and over in that same spot?
Yeah, they were random all over the place, and a lot of them, too. As you walked in the room from the doorway, there was a barrier wall there, and as you get inside the room went backward, probably about 5 feet to a wall, and that's where the chains were hanging. That's where all the scratches were there on the ceiling. And there was a few which you would consider bump scrapes on the door, but mainly all of the massive scratches were back in there. And it had no windows, none. It was just like a containment room of some kind.
Was there any bedding in there or anything?
No. There was on the outside of the door, that's where that wet dog smell comes from. Because my friend said, that's where he must have been sleeping, smelled that. He picked it up and looked underneath of it, and didn't seem to be anything under there. It was just an odd thing, that's all.
That jar of silver coins, did you get a look at what the coins were?
They were silver dollars. That wouldn't have been too unusual for somebody of his generation. I remember as a kid, all the old people carried silver dollars because nobody trusted paper money, believe it or not.
Right. I assume he was just squatting in that cabin?
Yeah, that whole area was owned by a corporation. The people I talked to about that who lived there, they said to rent one of those little houses. Those houses were originally part of the employee housing for that mill. All of their supervision lived there. And then after it closed down, it just became rentals. They were just small houses. I mean, probably 20 foot by 30 foot. They were just little shacks, more or less. And that cabin we're talking about, it was, I'd say 15 by 20.
Now, did you happen to see any of those symbols or anything like written on the walls in there?
I didn't see anything that told me that there's some kind of writing there or anything. But on the table, he'd been carving, whoever was there, had been carving on a piece of wood. And it was really well done. They made like X's all the way around it. It was like they were making a cane or something. It's a long piece of wood, probably about 4 feet long. But, it's just something that wouldn't have drawn. If you got that room there and you got that piece of wood that had been carved on, what are you going to pay attention to?
I was just thinking, did Dennis ever have a theory about George?
He just said the same thing everyone else said. I mean, I'd probably seen the guy too, but I couldn't be more specific. But he said he knew it was the guy.
There was 2 other incidents where somebody had hit something with their car, and the mayor's wife had her car attacked or something.
Yeah, that was years before that. Something actually tore the door off the mayor's wife's car on a road adjacent to where I was living at the time. Probably that would have been a couple of miles away, but something tore the back door of her car off. She's going to see her mother, who lived at a place called Madison Lake out in there. And she rounded a corner and something come out of nowhere and just yanked the door clear off the vehicle. And she, of course, got out of there. And it just, of course, upset her severely. So the police investigated, but again, it was just a door lying in the ditch. And they thought at first, well, maybe she had a wreck and didn't want to talk about it. But there's no evidence of a wreck. The car wasn't damaged other than the door was ripped off. So what could do that?
Did she see something, or?
She said there was something there. She said it was at night. The road was dark. There's no street lights out in there. It's just a country road. And as she slowed down to go around the corner, she said it felt like something was trying to pick the car up. And as she looked back, she saw something there, something dark. And when the door ripped off the hinges, she just spat up and of course, got hysterical. I mean, I might have even done that. But she got out of there, called her husband. He calls the sheriff, sends them out there, and all they found was a door.
And then what about the gentleman that hit something?
Yeah, I talked to him. He was an old guy who lived out at the same lake. He said he was headed out there to go fishing. And he said it was a foggy morning. He said he hit something. He said it was big. He said, I thought I had a cow. But he said it was on 2 legs. He said it had to be a Bigfoot. He said, but something took the whole front of his truck off. He hit it pretty good. He said he wasn't going that fast, maybe 25, 30 miles an hour, but he said even at that, he said it just tore the front of his truck up. And he said it ran off. He said he had to put out flares so he didn't get run over because of the fog, And of course, those days there weren't any cell phones. So he walked over to somebody's house and used their phone. The cops came out there and looked around. He said, something. He said, whatever it was. He said, they went over that way and they followed it for a while. But they never saw any blood, nothing like that. But what could you hit that would tear the front of your truck all up like that, yet not even bleed and not leave any kind of trail? So there was things like that happened all along through there within a 2 to 3 mile radius of that whole area there. Something like that was going on at least a couple of times a year.
Oh, yeah. Another thing is, I think you were probably off on your schooling. There was a night that a trash can was thrown against the house, or?
Yeah, it was an old metal trash can that got bounced off the back of the house. And she called the police, and the police came. They said, the wind blowed it up there. Just they tell you anything. Because if they don't have answers, what are they going to tell you? We don't know.
Now, you kept the trash cans on the side of the house, and this hit the back of the house. Is that correct? Yeah, but outside the back door, we just set the trash can right there so you could just throw the stuff outside into the metal trash can and then take it out to the curb when trash day came. And so the location it hit the house, did it appear it was carried there and thrown, or is it possible the wind did do it?
No, I knew when I looked at it that the wind didn't do that. I mean, besides, there wasn't any wind that night. It was just a calm day. And it was thrown pretty high up on the side of the house. Like, there was a back bedroom window and then a blank part of the house. And there was another side window where it cut back in to go to the back porch. But it was right there in between those windows where it bounced off the house.
Was there any tracks that day or anything, or?
No. In fact, it was the day before, or that week maybe, that I looked at that old shed. So it was shortly after that, like into the next week when that incident happened.
I thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate this. I know
Sure.
A lot of people are going to appreciate it too. Like, do you mind if I call you back if I have any follow-up questions?
No, it'd be fine.
Excellent.
I'm retired now. I don't work anymore, so.
Again, I thank you so much. Have a great night, Keith.
Okay, you too. We'll see you.
Bye-bye. Now, if you're ready to travel out to London, Ohio for an adventure, here's what you'll want to do. Jump on Expedia or Kayak and type in the closest airport to you and then the airport code CMH. This will land you at the John Glenn Columbus International Airport. London is only 30 miles away. There are 2 hotels in London and 1 campground called the London Primitive Trailside Camp Area. The main place to visit to see where all of these events happened is Robert Pass Trail. It goes right by George's cabin site. It's close to the pizza shop where Keith made the phone call, and the trail runs behind and touches the properties of both the tire shop and Keith and Diane's old home. Be cautious as there is still activity in the area with either a dogman or a Bigfoot. On the north side of the trail is a thick forest, and believe it or not, a marsh is formed in the old clay pits. Marshes are prime locations for cryptid activity. There's also chatter of the trail being haunted at night. The sites where the door was ripped off the mayor's wife's car and where the guy hit the big black cryptid both took place on Payne Thomas Road. Please be careful driving this road at night as there are several sharp turns. Also, right by George's old cabin is Sticks and Stones Tattoo Parlor. No matter what tattoo you get, it will be from this location and the creepy story of George behind it. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this episode. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and until next time, we're off on another adventure. God bless.